What is going on, everybody? And welcome back to another episode of Your Requests. This is the segment on my channel where you guys request movies to me to review, and I review them for you. And I've really had fun doing this so far. It's really entertaining for me because it's a way for me to engage with you guys and hopefully get my perspective on some movies that you either enjoy or are just interested in hearing my perspective on. And today's movie, I can't say I was super excited to watch it. I was interested to watch it, but the main reason why I wasn't like completely and totally on board is because my opinion of Gasper Noé is a bit all over the place. I was familiar with the subject matter of this movie, which didn't bother me because I'm all for art challenging you and creating challenging and engaging art. But I have had kind of a mixed perception of Gasper Noé. I've only seen two of his films. The first one being Climax, which I respected the visual approach and the idea of like trying to pull a very visceral, guttural, emotional reaction from you, but I didn't care about the characters at all. I thought it was poorly paced, and it didn't really do much for me, honestly. And I left not being really interested to watch another one of his movies. And his newest released film, Vortex, I watched and I adored it. I thought that it was his style executed in a way that worked perfectly for me because the characters were realized. There was an idea here examining dementia and the effects that dementia has on a family. And I thought that that was his kind of style utilized in a way that works for a viewer such as myself. So I was curious to see what I would think about this movie. And the film I'm going to be discussing with you today is Irreversible. Irreversible is directed by Gasper Noé. A woman's lover and her ex-boyfriend take justice into their own hands after she becomes the victim of a rapist. Because some acts can't be undone. Because man is an animal. Because desire of vengeance is natural impulse. Because most crimes remain unpunished. So, I went into this movie, like I said, not super excited to see it. I was interested because of the subject matter. And what I will say is, I personally despised this movie. I hated it. I don't really see a lot of the artistic merit that a lot of people seem to put in this movie. I think it really kind of opens my eyes up to what Gasper Noé is as a filmmaker. And like I said about Vortex, I think that worked really well. But I think this movie suffers from a lot of the issues that I have had with Climax. And while I think that, someone could look at me and say, Nate, this movie's meant to make you sick. It's meant, you're not meant to enjoy it. Well, sure, I can completely and totally understand those things. But I don't think anything that the movie is trying to do here really merits an hour and a half runtime that just feels devoid of any real characterization or really any sort of ideas about these people as people, rather than just the very simple concept of like sexual violence and assault is bad. Like there's really nothing else going for this movie that to me justifies its existence. And so I'm going to talk about it with you a little bit today. So in this movie, it's a very simple premise, and the interesting part of it is it all takes place backwards. So we start off with a man who his girlfriend has been brutally raped, and he is going with one of his friends to try to hunt down the person who assaulted her. And we see him at this club at the beginning of the movie trying to hunt this person down, playing all the way back to the events of the assault, and then before kind of getting like brief little glimpses into their relationship, the turmoil that existed a little bit before the events happened, and then just a scene at the very beginning of the movie. And so we're seeing these sets of events take place in backwards time, and the entirety of the film is just us experiencing this with these characters. So like I said, I despised this movie, and I think it's interesting when you talk about that because a lot of people who have gone online and kind of expressed their distaste for this movie, a lot of the people who kind of want to combat it and say, well, the entire point is for you to feel disgusted. Well, sure, of course, I would hope that most people that experience someone being brutally and horribly taken advantage of in their entire humanity stripped of them on screen would make anyone sick to their stomach. But the problem is, I don't really see a lot of artistic merit in here. And I've watched a lot of movies in my life where sexual assault and violence against women have been depicted that are much more tasteful and thought-provoking and that seem to have some form of meaning and understanding as to why they're showcasing it, other than just the very simple, hey, assault towards women is bad. Like, and that's the problem I have with this movie. There's nothing else there. There's really, like, you can try to talk to me about anything you want to unpack it, but there's nothing more. There really isn't. These characters are so incredibly hollow. And I will say the one positive I have about this movie is I think the performances are pretty solid. I think everybody kind of lives the characters as well as they can. I think the raw, authentic emotionality of these performers works to the film's advantage. I think you need very raw, visceral, almost animalistic reactions to something so horrible happening, because luckily no one in my immediate family has ever been impacted by something so horrible. But like, I could imagine feeling just that immense, raw, emotional overtaking if something like that horrible happened to someone that I love. And so that part of the movie I can understand completely, but I don't have a whole lot of positives to say outside of that. For starters, I'm kind of tired of Gasper Noé's visual style. I think that it's gimmicky. I think that he really sees himself as this sort of artistic genius. The way that he works with his cinematographer to create these very nauseating camera movements, a lot of handheld, not very centrally focused in the frame shots where like the camera's shaking quite a bit, different things of that nature. I find it really grating and irritating, and a lot of times it feels like a college student who thinks that they've created this very innovative and exciting technique, and when you do it over and over again, it becomes really tiresome. And I think this style, he tried to improve on it with films like Climax, where you still have a lot of the like shots that are kind of flipping over. You have like upside down movements. It's a little bit more static. There's a lot more like gliding, almost feels kind of like steady cam or crane moments that work better than others. But in this, I mean, I get it's supposed to be a very nauseating and chaotic feeling, but after a while, it's just like, okay, hold for a minute. Like, let us take in these characters instead of just creating a bombastic feeling, which I feel like that's really what Noe boils down to, is all he really wants to do is elicit a reaction out of you as a viewer. I don't think it's necessarily creating something thoughtful and compelling that'll sit with you for months after it's over. It's like you experience something and then that's it. And so that part of the cinematography really kind of infuriated me. I also was kind of confused as to the incorporation of like the blatant racism and homophobia in this movie, especially like the homophobia and the transphobia elements. I think the queer club being called rectum, like, it was a little ridiculous. And then when you look at like the way that a lot of the queer people inside the club were depicted, it was almost like the entirety of the club and the interior, it was like the people were viewed as disgusting. Like, just the sexual acts that were being committed, the way we were seeing people, the way the camera lingers on them, they just seemed like objects. They just seemed like bodies. And I think that's doing a very huge disservice to the queer community. I think like painting a visual of a queer person in that light, and especially like the trans sex worker in this movie, just really like left a sour taste in my mouth, because I kept asking like, why are they depicted in this light in this manner? It just didn't feel like it accompanied the movie or needed to be there by any means. And then as far as the blatant racism against like the cab driver who's Chinese in the movie and some of the horrible things that are said, I'm sure Noé or people could try to argue that like people were acting in a moment and they were upset or whatever, but it's like, no, like at the beginning, Vincent Cassel's character, when the one guy starts making off-color remarks, he like fights him back on it, but then he joins in and starts saying things with him, and it just made little to no sense to me why that was incorporated, because then that makes both of those characters even more unlikable. So to empathize with them in any way, shape, or form doesn't really work for me. And then there's the whole idea of like depicting 10 minutes of sexual assault towards a woman. Like, to me, like, and you can argue with me and say, well, art is supposed to push boundaries and you can depict what you want. And sure, I 100% agree. I like challenging art. I like art that is incredibly thoughtful and that makes you think as a viewer. But I think when it comes to sexual assault and violence against women, that is a very real and horrible thing that happens to a lot of people. And I'm sure, like, you can try to argue, like, well, people need to know the horrors. Sure, that's fine. But I don't understand the reason for depicting it for 10 minutes straight. Like, especially when you're not doing really a service to anyone other than saying, hey, this is bad. Most people that exist in this world don't need a movie to tell them that doing that to a woman or a man or to anyone is horrible. We know that. That's a common theme other than the psychopaths who do it. And I don't necessarily think that the psychopaths who do that kind of thing are going to watch a movie like this and be like, hey, that was bad. That's bad. I probably shouldn't do that. Realistically speaking, I mean, if you want to think about it in just the most base level terms imaginable, that's really like what is anyone else learning from this movie other than that? Because I watched that scene and it was horrific and it was saddening and it made me sick. And but outside of that, I'm like, what else am I supposed to get from this? Nothing. Like, bad things happen to people all the time, sure. And then, like, I did not like the incorporation where we got to the beginning about like what she learns at the beginning of the movie. That just like made it hit in a way that was even more disgusting. And it was almost just like torture porn, essentially. Like, it felt like it was Gasper Noé, like, oh, you thought it was bad already, well, let me give you another piece of information that makes it even worse. And sure, like I said before, you can argue all day and night that this isn't supposed to be a positive movie, this isn't supposed to, like, you know, make you feel like you're having a good time, you're not supposed to smile. But I love a lot of challenging movies like that. A perfect counterpoint to this type of movie would be Lars von Trier's Antichrist. But you look at a movie like that, and you see the violence and like the disgust, grotesque nature of a movie like that, and there's symbolism towards the separation in this married couple, what they're both going through mentally. There's so many different things and avenues that you can explore as to why violence is depicted on such a large, intense scale. Hell, I'll even talk about a movie I reviewed recently, which is Coralie Farge's Revenge, which is essentially a revenge movie about a woman who is sexually assaulted. But look at the way that the sexual assault is depicted in that movie by a woman who understands the horrors and the things that can happen to women solely for existing. It's done in a much more thoughtful way where the camera showcases stuff at first and then cuts away to where it's almost like the other man involved in that situation is like turning up the volume and ignoring it, and it's so much more thoughtful and engaging as to the way society perceives something like that, to where this is just showcasing the sheer raw brutality of the situation. And I just don't understand what more you're supposed to get out of that, because the characterization of these people is so incredibly hollow. You don't learn much more about them other than there's tensions in their relationship when they go to this party. They seem to be having a falling out, and there's a tender moment between the two of them at the end, which is technically the beginning, where they're laying in bed naked together and having this conversation. But like, I need more than that. I need more justification. I need another reason for this to exist other than just, wow, we're going to depict brutal violence to tell people that sexual assault towards women is bad. And I also think that the way that it's shot is a little bit distasteful, and I feel like it's almost more voyeuristic. It doesn't feel like it's done in a way that like showcases it horrifically. Totally. And it's a horrific situation, but like, I just felt gross watching the entire thing. And I've seen so many people who have reacted in that way, but I've seen people call this a masterpiece, and I just have to ask why. Like, what about it is a masterpiece to you, other than simply that it's depicting the horrors of assault on women with the blatant homophobia in this movie, the blatant racism, all of the other things that exist. I just can't really justify why anyone would think this movie is some kind of masterpiece. And I think it just showcases that Noé, for at least me personally, only works in certain ways. And Vortex is a way that he as a filmmaker works for me as a person. And I'm not really excited to watch any more of his material in the future. This movie really kind of left a sour taste in my mouth, and I would not recommend it. So have you seen Irreversible? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Leave me a comment down below and let me know what you thought. I despised everything about this movie, and I will never watch it again. As always, if you can like the video and subscribe to the channel, helps me out a lot and lets me know the type of content you're looking for. I'm always putting out new material and look forward to getting more out for you in the near future. And as always, everyone, thank you so much for watching, and have a great rest of your day.